Kate, and I am a knitter based in Canada. Today, we are going to do a standard knitting podcast episode, and this is actually my first time sitting down in 2026 to do one of these episodes. In fact, I don't think I've done one of these since like November of last year or so. I'm really excited to get back in the flow of things here. I'm going to be showing you 3 finished objects, including what I'm wearing right now, and then 3 works in progress. I've basically been thinking of it as my 3 finished objects were like my January projects, and then the 3 that I'm working on right now are like my February projects. And that's been like a really good pace for me. Like I haven't felt rushed or anything this year. So I'm really excited to share all of that with you today. Okay, I don't think I have any housekeeping or anything to share with you, so let's get right into it with what I'm wearing. This is the Guernsey Genser by Sandnes Garn. It's actually from this book, which is why I've got it next to me. This is the, I'm not going to try the Norwegian name, but I believe in English this is the Soft for Women book. There's a lot of really pretty patterns in this book. I'm really glad to have it. That being said, I'm about to crash out over this pattern. Fair warning, grab a drink, grab a snack. I have a lot of thoughts about this pattern. I'll start by saying 100% love the finished object. This might be my new favorite sweater. I absolutely adore it, everything about it. This is a very oversized drop shoulder knit, and it has 3 different charts of texture. The first chart and the third one both have cables. The one in the middle is just a knit purl texture. So that part of it, super engaging. Also, all of the finishing is 2x2 rib, also quite engaging. So it's one of those sort of potato chippy projects where you're always about to start something new, and that's really exciting. So I swatched for this. The yarn I used, by the way, is Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino. It was my first time using heavy merino, and actually I could see this becoming my new favorite yarn. I've really been enjoying it. I finished this maybe a month ago, and I swear I've probably been wearing this like every other day, at least a few times a week. I do not see a single sign of wear, not even like under the arms where it's pretty common. It looks brand new. I'm super, super happy with it. I also consider it, I wouldn't say it's like soft and cozy, but I also wouldn't say that it's scratchy at all. So if you want like a comparison to other yarn, I think what I would say is that this is like right in between like a Cascade 220 and a Sandnes Garn Pure Gint. I would say it's right in between those two in terms of like a coziness to rusticness kind of range. Anyway, for swatching. I swatched using the second chart, which is the just knit purl texture. I didn't really want to deal with cables in a swatch. And I also figured that this is the first chart after joining in the round. So in terms of like bust circumference, that would do pretty well. I originally swatched on 4.5mm needles, and it turned out a little bit big. And so this is my 4mm swatch, which turned out a little too small. That's actually been a common theme for me lately. I'll come back to that later, where I swatched twice and one's too big, one's too small. I ended up going with a size 2, and with my math, it would turn out slightly smaller than a size 2, but I think still larger than a size 1. So I think I was probably still right around the recommended positive ease, and I am very happy with the fit in the end. Now let's get into the construction of this garment and I suppose my issues with it. So this starts like most drop shoulders with the back. What I found interesting about the very beginning though is that the start of it is just a rectangle. And I've done drop shoulders in the past, and I've never had this before, where you cast on the number of stitches for the back, and then no increases or decreases until, I think, like under the arms. So it's literally just a moss stitch rectangle in the back. And then any of the sort of shoulder shaping, like what I would normally do, or what I've done in the past, is a sort of trapezoid, where you cast on a small number of stitches. I hope my hand gestures make any amount of sense here, but normally I'd cast on like a small amount of stitches and then kind of immediately do increases to get like a sort of shoulder shape. That was not in this pattern. This is simply a rectangle, and then the shaping is once you have picked up stitches for the fronts. And I think it's actually worked out surprisingly well. I was worried that would affect the fit in some way, but I'm perfectly happy with the fit of this in terms of drop shoulderness. My issues started once I had done the shaping for those fronts and was coming over the shoulders here. So the way that part works is you do one front, then the other, and then during those fronts, you do some more increases for the neckline, and then eventually join the two fronts and knit flat until you get down to this cable section. Now, that all sounds very, very standard, very simple, and I'm sure you're looking at this and thinking, well, that's just like a moss stitch neckline, like what could the issue be? I don't remember how many times I frogged that section alone. I want to say like 4 or 5 times, just that section. And not like frogging a few rows, like frogging several days worth of work. Like getting down to here and having to restart from the shoulders. Basically what happened is I got to the part with the increases here, and I read it and I thought, okay, that's a little bit confusing, but I think I've got it. So I continued on with my life and got down to here thinking that I was all good, and then realized that I did not have the correct number of stitches to actually do this cable section properly. And at that point, like, I probably could have fudged it, added a few extra stitches down here just in order to get through the cables. But I figured I should really go back and figure out what I did wrong, be a bit of a perfectionist. So that's what I did. I went back, read the instructions again for these increases, and I thought, oh, okay, I see how there is another interpretation for this wording. I think I've got it now. So I did the whole thing again, got back to the cables again, same thing. Realized that there was a third possible interpretation of those words. And based on all, I think I had 3 different interpretations, tried all 3, only one of them would get me to the correct stitch count needed to continue on with the charts. So at that point I was like quite frustrated. I do want to take like a lot of responsibility here. I am not saying that everything that happened was the pattern's fault. I am not saying that at all. Clearly my interpretations were wrong. I just think that it's worth understanding that a lot is left up to interpretation here. And where I started to get like a little bit more skeptical of the pattern itself, I'll skip to later in the pattern now, and just what I'm about to say isn't like a big deal in the pattern, but I do think that it is indicative of the larger issue with the pattern, if that makes sense. Like, it's a good example of the kind of struggles that I was having. So when you get to the very end, on the sleeves, there's a part that is underlined to like indicate that it's important. And this is right when you're starting the decreases on the sleeves. It's underlined, it says, read next chapter before continue knitting. I have no idea what that means. And at this point I had struggled so much with this pattern that I was like, if it's underlined, it's gotta be important. Read next chapter before continue knitting. I don't know what a chapter means in this context, because if I turn the page, it's basically just the next pattern, which is a totally different pattern. The next section of this pattern is the neckband, which is completely irrelevant to the sleeves. So I assume that it's just telling you to like read the rest of the pattern before you start the sleeve decreases. I'm still really confused why that part would be important, especially because within the sleeve instructions, so it's telling you, I assume, read the rest of the sleeve instructions before you continue. It does not tell you how to do the cuffs. And that's the part where I'm like, it's not a big deal, right? I mean, I can figure, it did tell me how to do the hem on the body, so I can just do the same thing for the sleeve and it's fine. But if you're telling me that it's incredibly important to read the rest of the sleeve instruction, and then the sleeve instruction ends with, the sleeve should measure this many centimeters, and then there's a little tip about shorter sleeves versus longer sleeves, working an extra diagram, and then it just goes to the neckband. Like, if I was acting like a robot, or acting like a computer, I guess, and just following these instructions and doing nothing else, my sleeves would still be on the needles and there would be no cuffs. Which again, I mean, you can obviously use some logic there, figure out how to do the cuffs, but I do just think that that is indicative of all of the issues that I had. Anyway, I think I'm done crashing out now. I just wanted to get that off my chest. I do think that's maybe the most frustrated that I have ever been with, like, the wording of a pattern. And what's interesting about that is that I had heard in the past that Sandnes Garn patterns have, like, this reputation for, I think what I've heard in the past is, like, not including a lot of detail. And in my head, when I heard that, I always thought of, like, Pernille Larsen's patterns from Knitting for Olive. They're, like, super concise. Her garment ones are maybe like 2 or 3 pages long. They are just concise. Like, if it tells you to do a tubular bind off, it won't necessarily tell you, like, how to do a tubular bind off, but it's telling you what to do without giving, like, extra detail on how, if that makes sense. That's what I always assumed that people meant when they said that a pattern, like, lacked some detail. Just to be clear, this is a different experience because it's, like, wording in a way that is confusing enough that there's a few different interpretations. And sometimes when you have a pattern, a few different interpretations is fine because it's like there's a few different ways that you could go about this. But in this case, there's a few different ways you could go about it, and only one of them is right. Anyway, okay, now I am done crashing out. Now we can just talk about the garment itself. I am so happy with this finished object. I did link on my Ravelry, by the way, to a really good tutorial I found on how to do the sewn bind off for the 2x2 ribbing. I'm really happy with the look of that. And I do believe that was a modification I made. I'm pretty sure the pattern specified something else for the bind off, and I just went through YouTube and found the option that, like, made the most sense to my brain. Now, a few modifications that I made. The ribbing before the bind off was actually one of them. I'm pretty sure I did the hem to pattern. Yes, I think I did the hem exactly to pattern. But then for the sleeves, the actually, that can't be right, because it didn't tell me how to do the cuffs. Hold, please. Okay, so the end of the sleeve instructions say, work 1 round of stockinette stitch and decrease a certain number of stitches, and then it just doesn't tell you what to do after that. Presumably it's the cuff, but it does tell you to decrease some stitches on that stockinette row at the end. What I did instead of that was I went down an extra needle size, because I have found that in the past, if I go down an extra needle size, so in this case, I was on 4mm needles for the sleeve, instead of going down to 3.5, I went down to 3. And normally when I do that, I need to add in maybe like 1 stitch every 7 stitches, something like that, to account for the size difference in the needle. In this case, I just didn't do the decreases that the pattern was telling me to, and it had the same effect, and some nice tidy ribbing. Really happy with that. Then I wanted to do the same thing for the neckband because the 3mm needles had made the ribbing look tidy here. So I wanted to go down an extra needle size for the neckline. And one thing that I found with the pattern for both the neckline and the sleeves, the pickup rate, actually, let me double check that as well. Okay, yeah, so it doesn't give a pickup rate, it just gives a number of stitches to pick up, which is fine. What I found though is after calculating the pickup rate based on that number of stitches, it was something like 1 out of every 2 stitches I was gonna have to pick up. And what I'm more used to with patterns that I work is like 2 out of 3 stitches, even 3 out of 4 stitches for sort of like a diagonal neckline or the sleeve pickup. So I don't know if you'll be able to see here on the sleeve. I found that it made the pickup just look maybe a little bit messy. I sort of wish that there had been more stitches picked up here and then maybe a row or 2 of decreases before you actually get into the charts. That's kind of the effect that I ended up having on the neckline because I basically ignored the number of stitches that it told me to pick up in the pattern. I'll just tell you, I cast on, I think, 100 stitches instead, which was significantly more than the pattern says, and went down that extra needle size. And then the last modification I did was on the 3rd chart, which I think is my favorite one, by the way. It's what really drew me to this pattern as being like a little bit unique. If everything I'm saying about this pattern is scaring you away from it, by the way, I do think that the Ingrid sweater by Petite Knit has like a very similar effect. I didn't go for it though because I really liked this this chart here and this sort of cable with the knit purl texture right next to it. I really like the effect of that. So this is done to pattern down here, but on the sleeves, I wanted to make sure that the cables were somewhat evenly spaced around the sleeves, and the pattern didn't really account for that. I think that if I had kept it normal, I would have had like 1 cable on top and then 2 like right next to each other on the bottom of the sleeve. So I just made the knit purl part of that chart slightly shorter so that the cables were all a little bit closer together. I think that's the kind of thing that you wouldn't notice until I pointed it out though. Okay, and my last note, this is about the yarn rather than the pattern. Like I said, love this yarn. The other thing I was really impressed with is that I bought, I think, 11 balls of yarn to make this sweater. That's what I thought that it was going to use. I just broke into the 10th ball. I had basically 2 full balls of yarn left, and I've been really impressed by how far the yarn went, even though I had gone down a needle size, because remember that I picked the tighter gauge of the 2 that I swatched for, and it still went a very long way, and the finished garment is like quite lightweight, which is nice. So I've been really impressed with that. The one interesting thing that I found about this yarn while knitting with it, the only word I can think to describe it is dry. It almost has a feeling sort of like when you're working with a cotton summery yarn where it's kind of dry and it even like dries out your hands a little bit and is like very slippery. This yarn almost has that feeling, which is a little bit weird with a wool and kind of hard to describe. But I have found that it bloomed beautifully with blocking, and it's also softened quite a bit with wear. Okay, I've been talking about this sweater for far too long. I have one last thing to say though, and this is all on me. It's very embarrassing and I can't believe that I'm gonna admit it to you. I'm hoping that none of you noticed before what I'm about to say, and if you did, please do not tell me. I have a stain on it. So if you watched my project journal, you'll know that around the time that I finished this last month, I had to have gum surgery. Totally fine, everything's okay, it's just kind of annoying. So as I was recovering from gum surgery, I finished this sweater like later that day or even the next day, and I, at that time, could eat like nothing except for like Jello and pudding. Not fun, don't want to think about it. But basically, I went to block this sweater. I had the sweater lying on the floor. I was super happy with it. And I'm maybe a little bit out of it at the time, and take my Jello cups and immediately drop this big drip of red Jello right on my blocking sweater. I still can't believe it. I didn't even film it because I and I was like vlogging this whole thing for the project journal. I didn't even pick up the camera because I was like straight into action, need to fix this. The stain was just about here. I will explain what I did to get it out. However, I'm not saying that I recommend any of this. I think some of you will probably be screaming at your screens. I only used some of the things that I used on this because I had enough yarn where if I ruined this little part of the sweater, I could frog it back and redo like a third of the sleeve or whatever this was. It's not like I had a big stain in the middle where I had to be like really careful about the whole garment. I was just doing like one spot on the end of a sleeve. So not saying that any of this is what you should do with wool, but it did work for me, and I did have extra yarn to fix it should anything go wrong. So I tried to go from like least egregious to most egregious in terms of spot treating this thing. I started with, I think, a bit of vinegar, and then I did some baking soda mixed with water to make like a little paste. Again, just spot treating it, let it sit there for a while, basically trying to never let the thing go dry so that the stain wouldn't like set. That kind of worked, but we are talking about red Jello. The most the most embarrassing part of this is that I'm of course like Googling like how to get red Jello stains out, and all of the results I'm getting are people who are like, oh, my grandson spilled Jello on the carpet. I'm here as like a 30-year-old adult. Anyway, so vinegar, baking soda kind of worked, but not quite strong enough. So in the end, I ended up using some like commercial like stain remover and went and used that, again, just spot treating it, let it sit, and then went to block it again. So kind of like hand washing it, but of course not agitating it too much. Again, kind of worked, but not enough. The very last thing I tried, which is I think the one that I would not recommend, is hydrogen peroxide, just a tiny, tiny bit right on the spot. And that seemed to be, for me, what kind of did the trick. I also think that it probably took a bit of the color from the yarn out of here, but this color is like beige, so going beige to white, it's better than a Jello stain. So yeah, take all of that with a grain of salt. Do as I say, not as I do, and what I say is do not spill red Jello on your finished objects. Okay, let's move on to something that I will not crash out over. I'm really, really happy with it. So like I said, as I was finishing this sweater, I realized that I was gonna have extra yarn. And I really don't like having a ton of yarn in my stash. I'm always just like thinking about what I could do with it. And having nearly 2 full balls of yarn is just like a little bit too much for me to just put back in stash. So I wanted to figure out what to do with it. And as I was trying to figure that out, I went and watched Florence Miller. She's going to come up a few times in this podcast, I think. I went to watch her recent podcast, and she was making the Crown Shy hat by Ysolda Teague. And I looked at that and I thought, perfect. I don't need to do any more research. I'll just do that. So this is a cabled hat. In a lot of ways, it's quite similar to the Oslo hat by Petite Knit. I've made like 3 Oslo hats in the past, and that's what I was thinking of doing with this yarn. But I did think like, if I could find something a bit more interesting, I wanted to do that. And that's when I saw Florence talking about this pattern. The way in which it is similar to the Oslo hat is at the very beginning, this part is double folded. So you basically do this amount times 2 stockinette in the round. And then I actually don't remember how the pattern told you to do this, but there's a couple different options. You could do a provisional cast on. You could, I think, even just sew it down in the end. What I did though was like knit 2 stitches together, like knit the cast on edge with the live stitch. as you're going around, and I find that clean and not too difficult. Where it starts to differ from the Oslo hat is that right after that section, you do a quick short row so that you are then basically flipping the hat inside out, but like very quickly and easily. And then you start working a 2x2 rib here, which is different from the Oslo hat. The Oslo hat does some stockinette that ends up looking like reverse stockinette from this side. And the 2x2 rib is interesting. I wanted to try it to see, and I can see positives and negatives to it. The main positive, I think, is that it does give it some elasticity there. So I think if the hat was like a little bit too big for you, that would help it kind of like cinch in. The main problem that I have with it is, this might be kind of specific to me, but I used to play hockey as a kid, like ice hockey, and I always had the thing where the helmet, after wearing it for a full game, I'd take it off and I'd have this like line across my forehead, and it would stay there for like half an hour and look really stupid. I feel like I have a similar thing with this, where after I've worn the hat for a while, I can kind of see the lines of 2x2 ribbing. Anyway, so this is what the hat looks like on. It is so cozy. It is a little bit off gauge, which was intentional. The entire purpose of this make for me was to use the leftover yarn and have something really warm. At the time that I made this, it was probably like -30 here. And this is the Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino, which is a worsted weight yarn held with a mohair that I had lying around. That is off gauge for the crown shy pattern. So I think went down a size and went with that, and it worked out really well. The pattern on top is actually really interesting. You can see how there's cables, but then there's also, take this off to show you, I always regret putting hats on camera. So there's the cables, which kind of decrease into the crown, which is really nice and a nice detail. And then next to those cables, there's this, which looks like a cable, but it's actually a dip stitch. I had never done a dip stitch before. I didn't find it like the nicest experience. One point you're putting the right needle into a stitch that is on the right side of the yarn, and I found it to be a really awkward movement. Maybe I'll get used to it at some point if I do it again, but I remember thinking that like the hat was just enough dip stitching for me, and I think I would have gotten a little frustrated if it was on a full garment. Although I think part of that might have just been how heavy this yarn was. I feel like if it was like a fingering plus a mohair, it wouldn't have been as heavy and it wouldn't have been as hard to like dig the stitch out. Anyway, I think that's kind of everything. I have been loving this hat as a finished object. Highly recommend making hats off gauge if you're looking for something just like really warm. I've been really happy with this. Next, this is where we get into the mittens. I'm very excited about the mittens. So this yarn, we'll start with the yarn because I'd had it in stash for like over a year. At the end of 2024, I had a work trip to Scandinavia, and I picked up this Hillesvag Vilje yarn while I was in Norway. And it's this really nice rustic lamb's wool. It is listed as a fingering weight, but I can pretty confidently say that it works up as a sport weight. I just could not get a fingering weight gauge with it. I originally cast on, and my original plan for the yarn that I'd left it sitting around for a year to do was the songbird mittens. And I was pretty excited about that. I cast on for it, and the mitten was just turning out huge. Now you can tell me that I should have swatched for it. I should have, but I kind of refuse to swatch for accessories. I'm, as you've seen, very into swatching for garments, but for accessories, I figure, like, this is nearly the size of a swatch, so I'm just gonna get started, and if it's wrong, I'll restart, and it's not a big deal. So I did a whole cuff of the songbird mittens. It was beautiful, but it was way too big. It was so big that sizing down the needles wouldn't have done enough. So what I ended up doing was looking for specifically sport weight mitten patterns that I could use for this yarn. And this is the Effie Mitten by Skeindeer Knits. And I was happy for that actually, because she is a Norwegian designer and I did get this yarn in Norway. And these are such a nice fit. I've been wearing them so much and they are so beautiful. Some of the details that I love on the inside of the hand, I love how the cuff continues the hand pattern. I also love how if I turn down, hang on, if I turn down the thumb, that same pattern continues like seamlessly. I also thought that the instructions for this pattern were great. I would say up there with the kitten catch mittens in terms of like clarity and instructions. She also has YouTube videos available that she links to in the pattern about how to do certain steps. I didn't use those, but I'm always happy to know that they are there. I've had a few people ask me about mitten making and whether like it's possible for a beginner. I would say this pattern or the kitten catch mittens would both be really good options that have like really clear instructions. I would say if you've made something small circumference and you've also done some color work, not necessarily in the same project, this is basically merging those two skills together. So like if you're comfortable with magic loop or double pointed needles and you've also done a bit of color work, maybe in like a hat or a sweater, this is just those things, but in the same project, and I think you're good to go. My only small gripe with this pattern, I loved everything about the pattern. The only thing is that it did mention having a few different sizes, but actually the different sizes are just done by changing the needle size and then you get a different gauge. So there's really only one like number of stitches to cast on, one chart to work, but if you change the needle size, you could get a different size mitten. And then I have one gripe when it comes to the yarn as well. I love this yarn for like a nice rustic accessory. I do think it would be too rustic for my personal preference when it comes to garments. I like something rustic when it comes to accessories. My one gripe is that the yarn was so toothy. And when I say toothy, what I mean is that it almost has like a friction to it. Like, I don't think you'll be able to tell with the finished object. It's actually quite like drapey now. But the yarn almost wants to like stick to itself as you're working it. And when you're doing color work, you don't really want the yarn sticking to itself because it affects the tension of the floats. So I ended up finding that it wasn't super nice to do color work with, unfortunately. And specifically the effect that I had here, which is 100% a skill issue, it is on me, but I will say this is not my first time doing small circumference color work, and I have never had this issue with other yarns. The side looks a little bit like bumpy and wavy because that toothiness was affecting my tension on my magic loop as I was going from like one needle to the other. So absolutely on me, that's a skill thing, but it wasn't the easiest yarn to work with. Okay, should we stick with mittens? We're moving on to whips, and I think we will stick with mittens. So this was a mitten that I actually put on my Make 9, and I have something embarrassing to admit for this one too. So for this one, I knew this at one point, but I sure didn't know it when I went and bought the pattern. It's not in English. This pattern is in Swedish only. I did not realize that until I downloaded it from Ravelry and it said Tack. So I honestly totally fine. I just laughed it off because this is now my fourth pair of mittens, so I was really just buying it for the chart. This is the Januari Mitten by Maja Åkerström, and I've already finished the first one, finished and blocked it, so kind of like showing you a finished object, but I've only just started the second one. Yeah, literally cast it on and did 4 rows. So this is using some leftover West Yorkshire Spinners Signature 4-ply, which is a sock yarn that has some blue-faced Leicester content in it, which makes it quite a like nice rustic sock yarn, but nothing on the rusticness level of this one. This is just like slightly rustic. This is also way more of a fingering weight than that last one I showed you. So I won't speak a lot to the pattern on this one because I could not read it. I did do some like Google Translate for like a sentence here or there, but I did find for the most part I could get away with just following the charts. And then actually with the language, there were some like context clues, like I'm assuming tum is thumb. There was quite a lot like that. I now know what the word color is in Swedish. I know what diagram is in Swedish. Stitch, all of the key words were pretty obvious through like context. So I was able to get through with that. So a couple of really interesting things about it that were not in the previous mittens that I made. It starts with a few rows of 2x2 ribbing down here, which makes the cuff slightly longer. Actually, maybe I'll put on like one of each so you can see the difference. Yeah. So you can see how the cuff is longer on the Januari mittens. Other than that, I would say that they are about the same size. There's one difference with the fit of the Januari mittens, and I don't know how well you'll be able to tell when they're on, but the thumb is a different placement. So on the Effie mittens, the thumb is sort of just placed straight up like this, which is honestly fine. It's not like the natural way that you hold your thumb, but I will say that it's the natural way you hold your thumb when you're driving or when you are holding a dog leash, which is a lot of what I'm doing when I'm wearing this. So it doesn't bother me, but kind of a nice detail on these, which I will say is also a detail on the kitten catch mittens, is that the thumb goes off to the side a bit, so it's quite a natural placement. And the way that's done is simply by having more stitches on this side of the thumb than on the inside of the thumb. This also has that really nice detail where like the inside of the thumb just continues the hand pattern. When I first saw this, I thought, oh, that's actually a little boring for the hand. But in terms of a process knit, this is so much fun because this side like isn't hard. It's a chart that repeats pretty frequently, so it's quite memorizable. And then this side is obviously so easy. I don't think there are any floats to catch in this pattern either. Anyway, yeah, this was really nice. I love the contrast color. On the cuff, there's a tiny bit of purling in the color work, which I thought was another interesting detail. I really like that because I think it gives some texture to your color work. And yeah, one thing that I will say about the pattern, and I feel pretty confident saying this even though I couldn't read it, that the chart does not include charted decreases. And for that reason, and that reason alone, I don't think, well, also the Swedish thing, I would say even if you speak Swedish, or if you're really confident with translation tools, I still wouldn't recommend this as a first mitten, just because the chart doesn't really tell you how to do this part, like where to do the knit two together, where to do the SSK. It might be like super clear in the written instructions. I don't think so, just based on like how long that section looked and how much detail there was there. But yeah, I sort of got away with doing the decreases based on like previous mittens. Like, for example, this one, everything about these decreases and the thumb decreases is charted, and actually the entire mitten is charted. So you kind of just have a chart for this entire thing, and row by row you can work it. Whereas with this, the chart for the hand is like that, or whatever the repeat is, and then you just do it again and again and again, and at some point you have to figure out that you should now be decreasing, and then also how to do those decreases. So a bit less mindless in that respect, but if you have done some mittens in the past, even if you don't speak Swedish, I think that it is doable. Well, it is doable, and I think this was worth it because it really is beautiful. Okay, so yeah, I've started the second mitten on that. That's why it is currently a whip. I'm kind of hoping to get it done in February so that I can maybe wear it before we get into spring here. Okay, next, I think I'll do another half-finished whip. So this is another one where I have finished one of two. I've cast on the second, but I will just show you the first one as a bit of a finished object. This is a sock. This is a sock I have made in the past. And actually, when people ask me for sock recommendations for beginners, this is 100% the one that I recommend. It was the first sock that I ever made. Well, not this one, but my previous pair, which I will not show you because I have worn them to near death. So this is the Petal Drop Sock by Florence Miller. And this is a pattern that I'll fact check this and correct it if it's wrong, but I believe that it is a paid pattern where there's the option to add a coupon code and get it for free if you want to or need to. That is a really nice option, I think, especially for a beginner sock. Like if you don't even know that you're gonna like sock knitting, or if you've never seen Florence's patterns before, so you don't know if like you're gonna jive with her pattern writing style, that's a really nice option. There's also a full video tutorial, so if the instructions like don't work great for you, you can reference the video. I think when I was doing my first sock, there was one section, probably around the heel flap and gusset, where I just wanted to make sure that I was getting it right, so I went through the tutorial to that step to reference it. It's basically like I'll give a lot of details for this one because there is the option for this to be free. It is basically like a knit 5 purl 2 rib where the lace, so like the yarn overs and knit 2 togethers, is on the knit section of that. That means that there's no lace within the purl sections, and I think you'll be able to tell it basically just means that it's like a ribbed sock with some detail in it, and it kind of like maintains that ribbing. I actually haven't taken it off the blocker yet. Yeah, this looks great. Only modifications I've made here, I did a German twisted cast on. I can't remember if that was actually in the pattern. I followed the instructions for the cuff. That is a twisted rib. I think the pattern specifies like a row or two of purling after that. I didn't do that. I also shortened the ankle part of this. Followed the instructions for the heel. That is just a slip stitch heel flap. And then I think followed the instructions for the rest of it. So yeah, I think that making a pattern twice is a very good sign that it is a good one. And I could see myself making even more of these just as like a really good wardrobe basic. Also 2 sizes in this. I made the second size. A lot of my socks that I've made are on the snugger side. I think that that's like a better fit. But what I've found over time is that I actually reach for the bigger ones a bit more often, even if they're not a fantastic fit, just because they're easier to slip on, they're nice and warm in boots in the winter. So yeah, very happy with this. Obviously haven't even woven in the ends. Yarn is Lang Jawoll. I don't know the color. For some reason, I'm like really picky about colors and color names when it comes to garments. And then when it comes to sock yarns, I'm just like, this is green. Anyway, Yang Jawoll, which I have used in the past, but this time I did not use the reinforcement thread that comes with it. I can show you if you're curious though. Basically in the middle of the ball of Yang Jawoll, there is this little spool of reinforcement thread, and it's about lace weight. I would say slightly thicker, some kind of like nylon wool blend, and it's basically very, very strong. And the idea is that you can hold it with the sock yarn to have like a nice reinforced heel or toe, whatever you want to do. I have done it for the heel of a sock in the past, but I found that having like lace weight, or I suspect thicker than lace weight, held with sock yarn made for like a DK weight heel, which was a little bit weird. So I decided that in the future I'm just going to hang on to that, and I will use it for like any kind of darning in the future if I get holes in this. But I would say this is just like a really nice standard sock yarn other than that. Okay, that is everything on that. And that brings us to our final not finished object. I just started this a couple days ago. So this is the garment that I currently have on the needles. I've sort of been thinking about this as like my February garment, whereas this was my January one. I don't know if I'm gonna finish it in February. I'm certainly not like rushing myself, but it is quite wintry. So sort of like the mittens, I would like to get it done in the next couple weeks. This is, I'll actually tell you before I show you. From my Make 9, I showed a picture that I had found on Pinterest like a year ago. Not a knitting pattern or anything as far as I know, but I really liked the fluffiness of the sweater, the round yoke, and specifically the color palette. So I decided that I wanted to find a yarn and a color palette that matched, and then find a pattern that would work well with it. So the yarn that I ended up choosing, I'll maybe show you that first. So it's a 3-color color work, and all of these colors are from Knitting for Olive. When I do want like a nice artistic color palette, especially if it's like muted colors like this, Knitting for Olive. So I'm using the Merino, which is what's in my hand, and then I've also got matching mohair. And the color palette I went with is a soft blue, cardamom is the one in the middle, and cream is the sort of off-white one. So we've basically got like a muted, cool blue, I would say cool toned, neutral, brown, grayish, and then a sort of warm toned white. So what I end up getting is like low contrast between these two, and then a higher contrast between those. And the pattern that I picked for this is actually one that was not on my radar when I made my Make 9, because it was listed as a sport weight, and I knew that I was going to be going for fingering plus mohair, so more of a DK weight. But I've actually had this pattern in my favorites for like a really long time, probably a year now, and it just didn't come to my mind for this project. This is the Kerti Sweater by Orlane Sucche. I am so sorry. She is a French designer. I swear I speak French, but French names are so different from French Canadian names that I always, when I see them, feel like I actually don't speak French. Orlane Sucche. I'm going to stop trying. I'm so sorry. So I've done, I think, exactly half of the yoke. And as soon as I downloaded this pattern, I was immediately so impressed by the style of this pattern. This is a new designer for me. The level of detail in this pattern is on par with the best that I've ever seen. I just started scrolling through it because I had swatched twice, actually exactly like the Guernsey Genser. I swatched on 4mm and 4.5mm. One was too big, one was too small, so I had to do some math and figure out which one I wanted to use. Ended up going with 4mm, by the way. I think that's just a personal preference thing. I prefer the denser gauges to the more open gauges. Anyway, not really the point. When I was scrolling through the pattern to try to find all the information I needed to do the math, first thing that really impressed me, very detailed schematic with like measurements for basically everything. Because based on that swatch and based on the fact that I picked the smaller one, my first thought was, ooh, I wonder about my row gauge, because my row gauge was a little bit short. And for me with round yoke sweaters, I prefer a deeper yoke. That's, again, personal preference. I know that's not to a lot of people's taste, but I was worried based on my row gauge that this one would turn out a little bit shorter. There was a schematic that included measurements for each size, including the yoke depth. So I could then take those numbers, do my math based on my gauge, and figure out everything and like go into this with confidence. So based on all of my math, I ended up picking a size 5. It will turn out smaller than the actual size 5. I'm specifically going for 20 centimeters of positive ease. The recommendation in this pattern is like 8 to 20 centimeters of positive ease. The other thing that she did, which not everyone does, and I am so appreciative when it's there, is that she said what amount of positive ease the sample is, which is so helpful because I fell in love with this pattern based on that picture. I basically want that fit, so now I know exactly what size I should be making. Incredible. Last thing that incredibly impressed me about this pattern, I don't think I have ever seen this in a pattern. First of all, 3 color work charts. So, well, 1 chart, but 3 versions of it with like, one has the colors of the sample photo, one has like black and white, and then the other one has like shades of gray so that you can color in your own colors. So nice, so helpful. And those charts tell you where to catch the floats. There was a symbol in the chart that I didn't recognize. It was a little anchor, and the anchor means anchor your float. I've never seen that. It's so nice because I'm not sitting there when I start a new row and counting like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I guess that means. Anyway, oh, I should also mention 3 colors in the color work, but you never use 3 colors in the same row. So it's still, I would actually say, very beginner friendly color work. It's quite I guess not memorizable, but like when you start a new row, you can very easily look at the chart, memorize what that row should be, and then carry on without looking at it. So yeah, I'm very happy with this so far. Very happy with my yarn choice. I love the like somewhat low contrast, but then there's a bit of higher contrast with the cream. And I'm very excited to see how this turns out and very excited about the pattern that I chose. Okay, so I think that's everything that I have for you today. I ended up talking about like some acquisitions because I acquired yarn for my whips. So thank you for being here today. If you do have any questions about anything, please leave the questions in the comments. I have done a terrible job lately of replying to comments. If you've been following along with my project journals, you'll just know that like things have been crazy for me at the start of the year. I want to get a lot better about replying to you guys. I do read everything. And another thing I was thinking of doing is more of like a Q&A. So if you do have any questions for me, if they're technical or non-technical, let me know and I will do my best to answer them in maybe a dedicated video, maybe in a future podcast episode. And actually, my next video that I've already filmed is going to be all about my yarn choices and favorite yarns, ranking those yarns. I was talking about yarn for a long time when I filmed that, so I'm hoping that there is maybe chaotic, but a lot of detail in there. So yes, thank you for being here, and I will talk to you soon.